In this presentation, we're going to consider how to be living in the country on a budget. Inevitably, when I have done my 4 or 5 part presentation in a live audience in a church setting or a camp meeting seminar, when a session is over and we have questions and answers opportunities, inevitably someone will bring up the subject of lack of funds to be able to go out and buy some country property and develop it, or buy an existing place and do alternative energy and all these kinds of things that would be nice, but most people can't afford to do all or any of it. And so this presentation and the previous one that we did on country living on a budget on how to build a tiny house was intended to provide ideas for ways to live a country lifestyle and still do it with little money, or at least save money in the process. So this session is country living on a budget, money saving tips, building a modest cabin, kitchen and household savings, and country living savings in a more general sense. So we did, like I said, a previous session on building a tiny house. And the difference between a cabin and a tiny house is a cabin is permanent. It's built on the ground and it doesn't have wheels, where a tiny house is similar to a house on wheels like an RV, except a tiny house is more insulated and more like a home than an RV would be. So in this session, I'm going to not only discuss building a cabin, but actually show you one that was built and is still in existence. And in this example, we are once again tapping into the experience of Dr. Lloyd Amy and his wife Mary Margaret, who are friends of ours. And like I've said in previous sessions, Dr. Amy and Mary Margaret were professors, instructors at Pacific Union College in California. And during the latter part of their tenure there, they were dreaming of having property back in the Northwest where Lloyd had grown up. And he enjoyed the evergreen trees and the greenery and all of that. So on their vacations, they would come for a couple of weeks each summer up to the Northwest from Northern California. And they would go backpacking and hiking and so forth, and dreaming of being able to find a piece of land that they could purchase and put a cabin on and someday move when they retired. So, as I had explained in previous sessions, that Lloyd Amy, while he was at PUC, was a biology teacher. He's an entomologist and has his doctorate in bugs, you might say. And he presented the idea to the administration in a faculty meeting that they needed to have a biology course that wasn't for biology majors, because the requirements was every freshman had to have a biology course, and yet they didn't have a biology course that was general. So they said, well, go ahead and make one. And so this was during the hippie era, and living off the land and all that was popular among young people. And so he went to, called the class the Country Living, and went to try to find a textbook that was appropriate, and he couldn't find one. And so he went to Southern Publishing looking for a book, and they said, well, we don't know of any, but if you would write it, we would publish it. So he embarked on making the book The Country Way, which is out of print. It has had 2 different printings, different covers and stuff, and they are available periodically on eBay and Craigslist and things like that. So anyway, this book was written and used as a syllabus for his class, and his goal was to have the property the way he envisioned it in the book. And so in the 70s, while they were in the midst of their teaching at PUC, they pursued purchasing land on one of their trips to the Northwest when they were hiking and stuff. They were always praying about it and looking for country property, and they found property in the vicinity of this picture. This picture is not their property, but it's on the same road. At the time they bought the property, the road was a gravel road, washboard, hilly, narrow, 1-lane road coming up the hill, and they had to crawl basically on their hands and knees to get into the property because it was so overgrown with undergrowth and things like that. So they bought this acreage, and as their vacation times allowed, they began clearing the land, and then eventually, then eventually they built a cabin, which is the point of this presentation. So in the 80s, early 80s, they built this cabin, and this cabin is on skids. It's on logs, and it was built with a few minor exceptions, such as shingles and doors and windows and paneling on the inside. The actual structural materials and the siding was all from the trees on their property. As they cut the trees down, they ran it through a mill and made the dimension lumber, made the siding, and they built the cabin. Now, I would throw in here that in today's technology, there is a device they probably didn't have when he did this. Maybe they did, but there's a thing called an Alaska sawmill. And what it is it's an attachment, fairly big attachment, that hooks onto a chainsaw. And you can actually make dimension lumber from a log with that device connected to a chainsaw. So if you decide to embark on this type of a venture, look into that Alaska sawmill, I should say. So when this cabin was built in the 80s, it had no power, it had no indoor plumbing, and no running water indoors, and they had spring for water. The spring was about a quarter of a mile away on their property, and Mary Margaret is a small woman. She's about 5 foot tall. She would go and walk out there, go over the edge of the bluff to where the spring was, fill the pail full of water, and carry it back to the cabin. That was their running water, was her walking back and forth to collect the water. And I will show you how they used the water in a moment, but once they were close to retirement, they started building their house. And this is the house as it was built in 1989. And when they retired and the moving vans moved their stuff, the garage was completed enough that they could store their things in rows in the garage while the house was enclosed, and they could finish it. He made all the cabinets, he made all the trim, he did all kinds of woodworking, interior things in his little wood shop that's in the back of the garage, behind the garage. So this is where they live at the time of this recording, and the cabin is still in the back of the property. And here's what it looks like with a new coat of stain, and you can see that it's you can't see the logs underneath anymore with the beautiful ferns and things. showing a little wear, but it's in pretty good shape for being as old as it is. It's 40 years old. So this is Mary Margaret, and she is showing you their shower. Now this cabin had basically 2 rooms. About 2/3 of it or less was the main room, the great room, which had a little wood stove, a kitchen wood stove, and a couple of cabinets for, food and that sort of thing. And as you saw, there was a sliding glass door with a table and chairs and flowers on the table. You can see from this picture the cabin was lined with paneling. It's not sheetrock, and so it's real easy to put together. And this is in the bedroom, and to the right, you'll see in a moment, is the closet. But the point I want to show you is this is really clever. This is their shower. It's unused, it's dirty, but she was willing to show it to us anyway. And it's got a regular shower nozzle head thing on a flexible hose. But you'll notice there's a pail up at the top. And oops, what happened? I had another picture. Anyway, that pail is hooked to a rope that has a pulley, and you can see the rope on the right there. And as they lower the rope, the pail comes down. They fill the pail with water. They pull the rope and tie it off, and now it's up gravity-fed water for having the shower. Pretty ingenious. And so that's pretty cool. So that's my demonstration of how a person could build a cabin. You could literally build a cabin on off-grid with a chainsaw and not have electricity. Today you could have a generator, but you could literally go way out and have a chainsaw and build yourself a cabin. So the next presentation is household things.
You can save money on any consumable. That is, anything that you use up, such as laundry soap, dish soap, or cleaning products, paper products. I will be talking about money-saving tips dealing with food. Some of the money-saving tips will also deal with something that is in short supply, which is time. I will start with buying in bulk. When buying in bulk, you not only save money, you will be saving on time. You will be purchasing food at a lower price per unit, such as ounces or pounds, plus saving yourself extra trips to the store, in turn saving on gasoline and time again. An example, if you use 25 pounds of flour each month, buy 50 pounds. That way you will not need to go back to the store the next month for another 25 pounds, saving on gasoline and time. You buy bulk to get a lower price, but if you can't use it all, split it with someone. An example would be spices. It's hard to use spices up before they lose their potency. So potatoes, if you buy 100 pounds of potatoes, have a place to store them, and have at least 5 recipes that are your family favorites and you like to fix. If you don't have 5, look on the internet, ask other people for recipes, and look through cookbooks. You can also go to the library and find cookbooks to go through. If you have different ways to cook them, you will always use them up and your family won't get food fatigue. Remember that if you aren't using them up, you can also dehydrate them for later use. One way to save money on food is to use what you have. If your office is having a potluck and you have rice, use it. Using your bulk purchased foods, make a delicious dish for hardly any money. An example would be, if you have rice, don't choose to make a dish using noodles that you would need to make a trip to the store to buy at full price. Cook double batches of food. If you're chopping half an onion for a dish, chop the whole onion and make 2. This is a big time saver. You would assemble them and throw one in the freezer and cook one for your dinner. If making in a 9 by 13 or any size casserole dish, freeze the casserole, then pop the frozen casserole out of the dish. Wrap it up and put it back into the freezer. This saves room and allows you to continue using the dish. When you're ready to cook that casserole, put the casserole back into the exact dish and bake it for your dinner. Basic ingredients. Cook with your basic ingredients that you have bought on sale or in bulk. If you have a special recipe that uses more expensive items, only make it for special occasions with possibly purchased on sale ingredients. An example is I have an East Indian recipe that has a few expensive ingredients. I make it maybe 2 times a year so that it stays special and we enjoy it each and every time. Avoid eating out. If leaving for the day, take food with you to cover the meals when you're away. Of course, sandwiches are great, but I have put hot food into a thermos for a nice hot lunch or dinner. Always take water with you. Never buy it unless absolutely necessary. If you must have cold water, use your insulated beverage cups or an ice chest that is smaller for car use. Cut back on drinks. If you drink water 50% of the time, make it 75% and then work on 100%. Water is totally free. I've mentioned casseroles, but another dollar stretcher is soups. I make soup and freeze it in 2-cup portions if it is for one person, and larger portions for more. If food is given to you, make sure that you use it. Don't let it go to waste. I was given a bag of onions once, and they were starting to go soft. I found 3 in the bag that were still good. I chopped them up into a fine dice and put them into the freezer. I was also given half a box of softer apples. I dehydrated them and used them in my homemade granola. So if you're driving and you see a fruit tree that isn't being picked, ask someone if you can pick the fruit and keep half. Sometimes they say keep it all. This is a good way to get free fruit. So one of my favorite ways of saving time and money. Have from scratch beans and brown rice cooked and portioned in your freezer. I cook each one and portion them out separately. Rice in one bag, beans in another. So if you have these two time-consuming but very inexpensive foods already done, you have so many meal options open to you. So when you're short on time, you just pull already cooked or chopped ingredients from the freezer, throw them together, and you have your meal. I also like to chop celery, onions, and peppers in a fine dice and put them in the freezer so that I can make a fast meal. A lot of times your food prep is what takes the most time, and that also when you're tired, you don't want to cook from scratch. So you're more likely to order out or stop on the way home if you're in a time constraint. I like to fine dice my veggies because when you freeze them, they change texture just slightly. So the smaller the dice, you don't even notice it. So buying in large cans, you can buy food in number 10 cans. This allows you to make big batches for later use. I find them easy and usually they're less expensive. So tomatoes, you can, and then in a number 10 can, you can make spaghetti sauce, goulash, soups and stews. I buy peaches, and we eat all week on them. If you're hungry and you need a snack, you just go to the refrigerator and get your bowl of peaches. We eat them for breakfast, and you can make peach cobblers or freeze them and make smoothies. And don't forget, you can also grow your own herbs, fruits, and veggies for a good price. So if you're at the store and you can buy a case of something that's on sale and make sure it's something that you use, do it. Don't just buy what you need that week. That way, the next time you need it, the item, you won't be paying full price for it. So I want you to think about holding a dollar bill in your hand. Now drop it into the garbage can. That is what you're doing every time you have food waste. This can be one of the biggest problems that you have on a tight budget. So what do? When dealing with children and you're throwing food away, just give them a very small portion. If they want more, you can always give them a little bit more. With leftovers, try to use them up creatively or freeze them if possible. If you do not eat leftovers, try to cook as closely as you can to what you will be eating. Just remember to always look for savings, and no matter what you're dealing with in buying, cooking, and preserving your food.
Homestead hacks, saving money at home. Wherefore do ye spend money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. Isaiah 55:2. This is a good text that reminds us to use our income, our money, for things that are beneficial to our well-being, as opposed to just purchasing things that satisfy our vanity. We commonly call those doodads, things that we just spend money on because we like them, not because they provide us sustenance or protection. A penny saved is a penny earned was a maxim that was coined and published by Benjamin Franklin in the Poor Richard's Almanac, and it rings true today, even in an era when the penny may be becoming very rare. So the first one is wash all your clothes together, colors and whites and darks, all in one load. Some may shudder at this thought. I was taught to sort my laundry, and one of the key things to remember is that if you have a new garment, wash it separately a first couple times just to get those free dyes out of it. But once it's been washed a few times, it typically has less ability to have those dyes move into other clothes in the laundry. If you have something that you really need to keep white, maybe it'd be better just to hand wash it and line dry it. Washing a load together, when you have a load of colors, darks and whites all together, saves soap, saves power, time and money, because you don't have multiple loads that you're running at multiple times that are not full loads. So that's one way that one can save money doing laundry. Another way one can save money doing laundry is by line drying your clothes. That way you save electricity and or propane depending on the type of drying machine that you might have. So line drying can be done any time of the year. If it can't be done outside in the sunshine due to the wetness of the weather, it can also be done undercover if you have a carport or something like that, or in a garage, or even in your house for that matter. So line drying doesn't even require clothespins. It can just be hung just straight over the line to dry them. And in the wintertime, they can be freeze dried to start with. Another way to save money on the laundry end of things is to make your own laundry soap. 1 cup of baking soda per load is one way that you can use a non-commercial laundry soap. This is just pure baking soda, much cheaper than typical detergents. Or you can use Castile soap. Moving on to the garden, you can create your own fertilizer by making compost from worm castings called vermicompost. Vermi means worm. A couple different permutations of that here. Small bed with a lid that rises up. You could save the liquid worm tea for fertilizer as well. And your worm bin layers, beginning with a paper lining, having some organic soil, leaves, cardboard, sawdust. Then you put your food scraps in and cover it with sawdust and paper too. They like to have a nice moist area covered to work under, and then just keep lifting that and adding the food scraps to it. One thing on the worm bin, if it's a plastic bin, make sure it has a place for the moisture to leak out the bottom and collect as worm tea. You don't need fancy trays for starting your starts. You can use egg cartons, yogurt cups, clamshells, newspaper cups, toilet paper rolls shown here. Lots of different ways to even pressed soil blocks, which have no outer covering at all, to start your seeds in when you're starting your starts in the springtime. Also, you can use wood chips. They're often free for mulch to keep moisture in and weeds suppressed around your plantings. It also helps to build the soil over time. You can see that this particular garden here has a compost bin, as well as using some bird netting and a sheet of plastic to do some solar killing of weeds. Used motor oil. You can reuse motor oil for lots of different things. You can just put it back in the same old containers that it came in or into other containers. A old logger who did some tree felling on our property shared with me that he always uses his used motor oil as bar oil in his chainsaw rather than purchasing chainsaw bar oil. He's done that for years. You can use it for a wood stain. You can use it as a machinery lubricant to keep things from getting rusty. And even in a pinch, can be used for heat and light, although not optimal, kind of a last resort. Homemade cleaners are less toxic as well as more readily available in many cases. You can use things like oregano in solutions, vinegar, garlic juice. It has a very high potency, low concentration in water. You can make your own vinegar out of fruit, particularly apple castings, so that it can be homemade and home squeezed and home distilled. Reuse old fabric. Don't toss those rags and those old clothes. Just reuse them for all kinds of things. So there's lots of different examples here of denim being used for crafty items as well as practical things like purses. You can make rugs, usually using a crochet kind of a technique for crocheting the rugs together. Use them for shop rags, use them for cleaning up spills and things like that. Repairing other clothes. So rags can be a very beneficial thing. You can use them for compresses, for poultices, first aid kit, lots of different utilization for old fabric. Save old hardware. You may get extra nuts and bolts and things that you may purchase. Save that aside and you may find a use for them in the future. Just try to keep it organized. Old hinges can come in handy. Rusty nails, they don't have to be rusty, just bent nails, used nails can be reused many times. Just straightened. If you're disassembling something, save the pieces. You may be able to use them again in another application. So keeping them organized, though, is helpful in finding what you need at a separate time. Natural fly repellent, you can just use mint or basil, fresh mint or basil hung around. Can keep flies at bay. Reusing soda or water bottles as planters. You can see on the upper right there's one that's just been cut and then inverted with a hole in the cap so that it does its self-watering by a wicking motion up into the planting. Vertical beds here in the lower right on a string, so there's several tiers of plantings there. So just kind of a novel way to reuse soda bottles or water bottles. Mosquito repellent, you can use garlic juices for that. Marigolds tend to work in that regard too. Lavender oils, maybe even the lavender plants can keep mosquitoes away and at bay. Also, just making sure that you have no standing water around that they can lay their larvae in and reproduce in. Save jars, glass jars, can be used for lots of different things. So over here on the right, you have them used as cloches, which is basically just a small individual planting covering a little greenhouse, mini greenhouse for early in the spring when frost is still a hazard. This was used a lot in Europe to help plantings along early in the spring, storing all kinds of dry goods as well as canning things in. And also used here as a net or post covering when stringing bird net. Nothing is liked more than any kind of an edge for bird net to catch on. And with a jar over the end of a stick, it has much less chance of catching. You can make your own seed tape. Instead of purchasing costly seed tape, you can put it on paper towel or toilet paper and put the seeds on wet into rows and then plant them, and they'll be adequately spaced as you plant. Just be careful. You can overdo it. This particular shot shows a junkyard full of snowmobiles. If you get too compulsive on one item, it can overtake your life. I remember just enjoying going over through an old storage area on the Walla Walla University Marine Station campus prior to its renewal. As a student there, enjoyed poking around in all the various nooks and crannies and storage sheds of all kinds of things that had been kept for sale or had been picked up at garage sales over the course of time. There was a period of time where they had a very lean operating budget, and the managers at the time were expert garage sailors, and they would bring home all kinds of things. The thing with that is there often was duplicates of things, because one would pick up a variety of things and then not realize where you'd put it and buy it again at a later date. So organization is very helpful in keeping a tidy area of surplus rather than just having it piled around. So there is a benefit to having extra things around and reusable things stored so that you can use them in a pinch and make do when you need to. So a few homestead hacks that may be helpful in saving money.